Did you ever wonder what would have happened if instead of copying Shanks and punching bandits, the very first legendary pirate Luffy met was Silvers Rayleigh, the Dark King himself? What would happen if Fuchsia Village's goofy rubber kid was taken under the wing of the Pirate King's right hand as soon as he ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi? Well, for starters, we can assume a few things stay the same. Luffy is still in Fuchsia, still raised by Dadan, still bites into that weird purple fruit on a random day, and turns into rubber. This means that you still get the same reckless kid with the same insane will, but now imagine that on the day Shanks is supposed to be the main influence, Rayleigh walks into that bar instead. The key premise of this video is simple. This is the story of a Luffy who is picked up, mentored, and trained by Rayleigh from around the moment he eats the Gomu Gomu no Mi, long before Alabasta, Enies Lobby, or Marineford are even on the horizon. No 2-year time skip, no waiting until after Sabaody. From episode 1, the Dark King is in the picture. Considering Rayleigh is a master of all 3 types of hockey and the man who literally sailed with Goldie Roger, it's likely that Luffy's entire childhood shifts from roughhousing with bandits to structured, terrifying training. A kid who learns observation just to dodge Dadan's punches. A boy who gets armament drilled into his rubber fists before he even knows what Gear Second is. And the Seeds of Conquerors? Those aren't random bursts anymore. There's something Rayleigh calmly explains and pushes Luffy to control. This means that East Blue, the so-called weakest sea, turns into Luffy's personal training ground. We're talking about a version of Luffy who walks up to Morgan, Buggy, Kuro, Krieg, and Arlong with basic hockey already online. Imagine Morgan trying to flex in Shell's Town and Luffy just casually coating his fist and shattering that axe. Buggy's chop-chop body parts getting tagged because observation hockey tracks every move. Arlong Park? I imagine that fight doesn't last long enough for a dramatic walk to Nami's tangerine trees. But here's the scary part. If Luffy is this strong, this early, does the Straw Hat crew even form the same way? Does Zoro respect him more? Or does he see a monster who doesn't need help? Does Nami ever stay? Or does she get freed and move on because her village is saved in a single night? We can assume that Usopp, Sanji, and the others might join under totally different circumstances, if they join at all. And while all of that is happening, the world government is watching, a child of the will of D, molded by Roger's right hand, growing stronger every year out in a backwater sea. That's the kind of thing that makes admirals start reading reports twice. Who moves first? The Marines, the warlords, or maybe even a Yonko who remembers Rayleigh's face? Anyway, in this video we're going to follow that entire path, from Fuchsia Village to a completely remixed East Blue, and then into a Grand Line where Crocodile, Enel, the warlords, and even the admirals have to deal with a Rayleigh-forged Luffy years ahead of schedule. So let's start at the very beginning. How does Rayleigh even end up in Fuchsia? And what does day 1 of Dark King training look like for a rubber kid who just wants to go to sea? For starters, we're not throwing the whole story out the window. Did you ever wonder what would happen if you kept almost everything from canon, but just slipped the Dark King into Fuchsia Village a decade early? That's the version we're running with. We can assume Luffy's core childhood still plays out. Fuchsia is still his home, Makino still spoils him, and he still eats the Gomu Gomu no Mi like a chaotic little gremlin at Shanks' party. Garp is still his terrifyingly loving grandfather who drops him off with Dadan, and Shanks still leaves that straw hat and sails away. This means that emotionally, Luffy's "I'm gonna be a pirate" spark still comes from Shanks, not from Rayleigh rewriting his dreams. The divergence starts right after that. Instead of quietly bartending on Sabaody and gambling his life away, Rayleigh hears about a rubber kid in East Blue who knocked out bandits with an invisible pressure. Or he spots that very familiar straw hat while passing through Fuchsia under some fake name. Considering he was Roger's right hand, it's likely he recognizes that Conqueror's hacky outburst for what it is. Curious, he decides to visit the village and ends up staying a lot longer than anyone planned. Now, Rayleigh isn't sitting Luffy down like, "So I was on the Pirate King's crew, let me tell you where the One Piece is." No. The rule here is that he keeps the big truths sealed. He doesn't reveal Laugh Tale, he doesn't explain the will of D in detail, And he absolutely doesn't hand Luffy a shortcut to the final island. Instead, during this time, he focuses on fundamentals. On observation. Haki drills using blindfold games around the forest. Armament basics by teaching Luffy to harden his fists just enough to punch trees without breaking his hands, and constant reminders that raw power without control gets your crew killed. Garp's role doesn't disappear either. In fact, it gets messier. He still wants Luffy strong, and he still throws him at mountains and sea kings in order to toughen him up. But when he realizes that Silvers Rayleigh of all people is lurking around Fuchsia, I imagine he treats him as a necessary evil. The two clash over ideology whenever they meet. Garp yelling about justice and Marines, Rayleigh shrugging and talking about freedom and the sea. Luffy, stuck between them, gets brutal physical training from Garp and Sharp, technical haki, and mindset training from Rayleigh. We need limits though, or the story breaks. Luffy is not a mini Dark King one-shotting admirals at age 12. He's still reckless, still goofy, still the kid who laughs while getting launched into the sky. The difference is that his instincts are sharpened, his observation is awakened early, and he has the beginnings of armament before episode 1 Luffy ever sets foot in a barrel. He'll still get hurt, still lose, still make dumb choices, but his growth curve is way steeper without turning him into an unbeatable god. Anyway, with those rules set, we can push play on episode 1 again and watch what happens when a Rayleigh-trained Luffy finally leaves Fuchsia and starts remaking East Blue. So when we push play again, Fuchsia Village doesn't stay a sleepy backwater for long. Did you ever wonder what would happen if the Dark King treated that little sake-drinking rubber kid as his full-time project? For starters, Luffy's games stop being games. Rayleigh starts simple. You're a kid in the clearing, blindfold on, listening to cicadas and the ocean. Then pebbles start flying. Sticks? Rubber bullets Garp donated. Luffy laughs and dodges on instinct at first, but Rayleigh is quietly sharpening that instinct into observation haki. He'll clap when Luffy moves before the throw, not after. This means that as soon as Luffy can walk, he's learning to feel intent, not just react to motion. Then come the bruises. Rayleigh coats his arms in armament, not full power, but enough that every tap stings through rubber. Luffy charges in like a cannonball, obviously, and gets swatted into trees. Again and again. Considering Garp's already throwing him at tigers in the forest, the loop becomes clear. Garp breaks him, Rayleigh rebuilds him. After a beast fight, Rayleigh literally draws Luffy's stance in the dirt, shows how his hips should twist, where to stretch, when to snap back. We can assume he keeps the joy but loses some of the recklessness. Luffy still grins, still picks fights he shouldn't, but now he pauses half a second before throwing the first punch. Is this guy nervous? Is he faking confidence? Rayleigh makes him say it out loud. He's scared. He's lying. Over time, Luffy starts reading people without realizing it's observation training. It's likely that by age 10, he can tell when a bandit is bluffing or when Garp is about to accidentally throw him off a cliff. Swimming drills are brutal until the devil fruit day. Rayleigh has him race currents, dive for rocks, learn how the sea pulls. As soon as Luffy eats the Gomu Gomu no Mi, that chapter ends instantly. No more ocean, only boats and barrels. Rayleigh sits him down and explains, in that calm way, that the sea will always hate him, so he has to love it enough to respect it. Luffy doesn't get the poetry, but he understands one thing. Falling overboard is not an option. Now Conqueror's haki. In canon, it just bursts out. Here, the first time Luffy's rage knocks out a wolf pack, Rayleigh is right there. He makes the kid sit in the middle of the unconscious animals and remember the feeling. Tight chest, heavy air, that invisible pressure. In order to stop Luffy from nuking everyone around him, Rayleigh teaches him a baby version of control. Push it at one person or at least away from his friends. It's sloppy, but a 10-year-old who can point raw conquerors at a bully? That's terrifying. Anyway, Fuchsia starts talking. That kid dodged a pistol shot without looking. The mayor's nephew fainted when Luffy got mad. Rumors leak out with every passing ship. A strange boy in East Blue, rubber body, weird eyes, knocks men out just by glaring. Garp hears, the Marines hear, And somewhere in the Grand Line, a red-haired emperor in training hears too. Who decides to move first? Who decides to move first? Did you ever wonder what would happen if the answer wasn't Shanks or Garp, but the man quietly sitting in the darkest corner of Makino's bar, watching everything with one eye half open? For starters, we keep the bar scene. Shanks laughing, sake spilling, that mountain bandit swaggering in like he owns Fuchsia. Canon says Rayleigh isn't here. In this timeline, we can assume he's at a back table, pretending to nap, observing how this rubber kid reacts to humiliation. When Shanks lets the bandit dump booze on his head, Rayleigh isn't annoyed. He's checking Luffy's face. Does the kid understand Shanks' version of freedom, or does he just see weakness? As soon as Luffy explodes, calling Shanks a coward, Rayleigh's interest spikes. This means that Luffy can't tolerate the idea of someone he admires backing down. When the bandit later drags Luffy to the docks, Rayleigh stays out of sight, measuring. He watches Shanks arrive late, still smiling, and then that calm smile vanish the moment a gun is drawn. One conqueror's laced glare, a shattered bottle, and suddenly Luffy sees what cowardly Shanks really is. Shanks loses his arm to the Sea King like in canon, but when he comes back, dripping and grinning, and places the straw hat on Luffy's head, the scene hits completely differently for Rayleigh. He knows that hat. He watched Roger wear it on the Oro Jackson, listened to the Pirate King talk about the future, while that brim shadowed his eyes. I imagine Rayleigh's fingers twitch, just for a second, like he almost stopped Shanks. Because he understands the gamble. From Rayleigh's perspective, Shanks isn't just inspiring a kid, he's handing Roger's will to a boy with the name D, who already knocked men out unconsciously. It's likely that in that moment Rayleigh decides, if this brat is going to carry that hat, he needs more than a strong punch and blind optimism. So one evening, after Shanks' crew finally set sail, Rayleigh sits with Luffy on the cliff overlooking Fuchsia. He doesn't reveal the Void Century, but he does break the comfortable illusion. He tells Luffy that the initial D shakes the world, that Roger's name still terrifies kings, and that walking around with that hat is like waving a red flag at the world government. The promise to become a great pirate stops being a kid's dream. It becomes a quiet declaration of war against the world's stagnation. Luffy's dream deepens. He still wants to be Pirate King. But now it's not just about sailing free or meeting Shanks again. In his head, Pirate King means surpassing Shanks, and this half-explained legend of Roger that Rayleigh refuses to fully talk about. Considering Luffy's personality, that mystery only fuels him more. How strong was Roger really? Why does Rayleigh's voice tighten when he says his captain's name? And while this is happening in a tiny East Blue village, the ripples start. Old marine files on Silvers Rayleigh, right hand of the Pirate King, get pulled from dusty archives. CP agents compare fresh rumors. Strange hockey bursts, a boy named Luffy, a man who matches Rayleigh's description drinking in a nowhere bar. Anyway, that combination, Rayleigh plus a new D, is exactly the kind of thing the world government doesn't ignore twice. So who moves next? Garp, CP0, or someone even worse? So did you ever wonder what would happen if that iconic barrel scene in episode 1 stayed the same visually? But the Luffy inside was a completely different monster. Same goofy grin, same straw hat, but this time you're looking at a kid who spent a decade with the Dark King. We jump forward, 17-year-old Luffy drifting toward the Grand Line on that tiny barrel boat. On the surface, it looks like canon. He's hyped for adventure, yelling about finding a crew, stomach growling like usual. But considering what Rayleigh put him through, the way he carries himself is different. His shoulders are loose, his breathing is steady, and even half asleep in a barrel. He's subconsciously stretching his senses across the ocean. For starters, his baseline is way above East Blue level. Observation hockey isn't some mystical surprise anymore. It's a trained reflex. He can feel killing intent like a cold breeze on his skin, track footwork through sound, and dodge blind as long as the attack is honest and direct. It's not Katakuri level or anything, but for buggy cannonballs, random marines, and early East Blue pirates, it's likely overkill. On top of that, Rayleigh would drill armament into his rubber fists and forearms. So when Luffy winds up a punch now, we can assume you'd see that subtle dark sheen, even if it's patchy and drains his stamina. An armament-boosted Gomu Gomu no pistol to Morgan's jaw or Buggy's nose. That's not just a funny punch anymore. This means that early villains get one shot in ways that make Marine reports sound exaggerated. And then you've got the wild card, Conquerors. Luffy already had the spark as a kid, but with Rayleigh around, those random bursts during training would occasionally knock out half the forest. He still can't control it, it only erupts when he's truly enraged or when someone tramples his core values. But East Blue suddenly has this sleeping dragon effect. One wrong move against someone Luffy decides to protect, and entire decks of fodder just drop. Mindset-wise, he's still Luffy. He's still laughing, still picking fights because they look fun, still getting distracted by food. But now he walks into a fight evaluating stances, listening to breathing patterns, and checking angles like Rayleigh is watching over his shoulder. I imagine every time someone pulls a gun, you'd see his eyes narrow for half a second as he tracks the barrel, the finger tension, the timing. Then he moves just before they shoot. Same idiot, better software. So why does Rayleigh let him leave alone? Because the Dark King isn't trying to raise a clone of Roger in a greenhouse. He tells Luffy straight, training against a retired legend in a quiet village is fake difficulty. In order to grow for real, he has to clash with the world, make his own judgments, and gather people who choose him, not Rayleigh. He gives Luffy a basic map, a few warnings about the Grand Line, and that's it. No secret Rayleigh hotline, no backup. Rayleigh frames East Blue as the first exam. The weakest sea becomes Luffy's personal testing ground. If he can't dominate here while protecting people, villages like Kokoyashi, places like Orangetown, then he's not ready for the Grand Line or the truth behind Roger's journey. And this sets up a fun question for the next part. What happens when a Hakyusing Luffy crashes into Alvida's ship and then Shellstown? Because those early arcs are about to get speedrun. So, did you ever wonder what would happen when a Rayleigh-trained Luffy slams into the Morgan arc? Because Shellstown is where East Blue first realizes this rubber kid is not normal. For starters, let's anchor to canon. Normally, Luffy shows up, learns that Zoro's been tied to a post for days under corrupt Captain Morgan, and decides, yeah, I like this guy, I'm gonna make him my first mate. He smashes Morgan's statue, exposes the corruption, frees Zoro from execution, and the two instantly bond over their hatred of twisted authority. It's messy, kind of goofy, and Zoro agrees to join almost on the spot. In this timeline, as soon as Luffy's little boat drifts near Shellstown, Observation Haki pings the whole base like sonar. He feels hunger, fear, and one presence that's stubbornly refusing to bow. That's Zoro. I imagine Rayleigh drilled into him, don't just charge in blind, read the field. So Luffy walks through the marine town smiling, but his eyes are sharp. The second the Marines shout intruder and open fire, he doesn't even stretch. He just tilts his head, steps aside, lets bullets whistle past like he's strolling through rain. To the grunts, it looks like teleportation. To Zoro, watching from the yard, it's terrifying. Cannon Luffy tanks bullets because he's rubber. This Luffy casually weaves through gunfire because his observation is already East Blue, breaking. This means that from the very first clash, the power gap feels insane. When Morgan finally swings that massive axe hand down, Luffy doesn't get dramatic about it. Armament coats his fist, the air ripples, and he punches straight through the blade. The axe shatters, the tower cracks, and Morgan is buried in rubble before he can finish a single villain speech. And then, Luffy does something different. Standing over the fallen captain, he dusts off his vest and says, almost annoyed, "Guys like you are trash." But the Marines aren't supposed to be. You can hear Garp in that line, and you can hear Rayleigh too. He's not rebelling against the idea of justice, he's furious that someone wearing that coat is using it to crush civilians. Considering the world government already fears Roger's legacy, a kid echoing that nuance this early is wild. Zoro notices. In canon, he sees a reckless idiot with guts. Here, he sees a future monster. Luffy unties him in one motion, Haki hardened fingers snapping the ropes like thread. "You owe me one," he grins. "Travel with me." But now, Zoro hesitates. This Luffy feels like a rising legend, not just a crazy rubber kid. If he joins, is he chasing his dream or hiding in someone else's shadow? It's likely that a swordsman aiming to become the world's strongest would feel that pressure way earlier, so he makes a different call. Zoro agrees to help Luffy clean up the base, repay the debt, and get some meat, but he refuses the title of first mate. "I'll sail with you for now," he says, "and I'll decide after I see what you actually do with that strength." Anyway, that tiny change snowballs hard, because if Zoro isn't locked in yet, what happens when Buggy, Nami, and the Grand Line start entering the picture? The monsters Turiam por has deities. So what would happen when that drifting pair runs into a clown who thinks he owns Orange Town? Did you ever wonder how different Buggy's arc looks if Luffy walks in with Rayleigh's training baked into his instincts? For starters, the setup is familiar. Buggy's crew is still shelling the town for fun, blasting buildings just to hear people scream. Nami is still in thief mode, targeting pirates in order to stockpile enough money to buy back her village. And Luffy still crashes into her life as a walking disaster, getting tied up, thrown in a cage, and dragged straight into Buggy's circus of chaos. In canon, he survives that mess mostly with cartoon logic and rubber gags. Here, we can assume the comedy is still there, but the combat reads very differently once the fists start flying. As soon as Buggy orders the buggy balls to fire, Luffy's eyes narrow the way Rayleigh taught him. Observation kicks in. He's not just dodging randomly, he's already stepping to where the shrapnel won't be. From the outside, it looks wrong. Cannonballs explode and this kid in a straw hat is strolling? Nami expects panic, but Luffy is casually weaving through blasts like he's walking through rain and already knows which drops won't hit him. One buggy ball comes in too close, and Luffy, a little irritated, coats his fist in a faint, dark sheen and punches. The iron sphere warps, cracks, and detonates midair. People see that. This means that the Rubber Man rumor instantly upgrades into something else. Buggy's chop-chop antics don't help him much either. In canon, his separated parts are tricky. Here, Luffy is tracking each piece before it even moves. Rayleigh's drills pay off. I imagine Luffy calling out, almost bored, "Right arm, left leg, torso," and then slamming each incoming chunk with armament-boosted blows. The parts go flying back harder than they can handle, joints rattling, paint cracking, Buggy coughing blood as the real damage transfers. Nami's reaction is the big character shift. She still thinks he's an idiot for smiling through explosions. But during this time, she also notices something terrifying. His gaze is always locked on every threat, every villager, every cannon. Considering her history with Arlong, a man who dominated rooms with quiet menace, seeing that same kind of battlefield awareness in a grinning teenager is unsettling. She starts to see Luffy not just as a tool to steal from, but as a potential walking disaster if he ever turned on her. And the world does not ignore this. Surviving Buggy pirates talk. Townspeople talk louder. Reports spread about a straw-hatted rookie who moved like he knew the future and punched through cannonballs. Local Marines, way out of their depth, file abnormal incident reports. Unknown devil fruit, possible hockey usage in East Blue. Dangerous. Somewhere far away, in a dim Marine office or a Cypher Paul archive room, a board officer flips that file open, sees the words rubber, hockey-like ability, and straw hat, and stops skimming. It's likely that someone quietly circles the name Monkey D. Luffy and flags it for higher review. And if the world government is already whispering about him in East Blue, what happens when this Rayleigh-trained monster rookie starts sailing toward the Grand Line? Anyway, keep that early red flag in mind, because the next islands he hits are exactly where those rumors start snowballing into real fear. Continuing from those growing rumors, did you ever wonder what would happen when this Rayleigh-trained Luffy walks into what was supposed to be one of his most human arcs? Syrup Village? For starters, Canon Syrup Village is messy and kind of charming. You've got Usopp, the boy who lies about pirate attacks every morning, shouting to an empty horizon. You've got Kaya, the sick rich girl, and her mild-mannered butler, Klahadore, who is secretly Captain Kuro, planning to assassinate her, fake his own death, and retire rich. In canon, the ambush at the cliffside turns into chaos. Nyaban brothers, hypnotism, villagers in danger, and Luffy getting his head smashed into the slope before coming back to crush Kuro. Out of that storm, Usopp finds a sliver of courage, helps defend his home, and Luffy invites him aboard as sniper and comic relief. Now plug in observation haki from day one. It's likely that as soon as Luffy steps into Syrup Village, that calm, polite butler just feels wrong. Killing intent is like a foul smell to trained observation. Luffy's laughing, eating, listening to Usopp's tall tales, but his eyes keep sliding back to Kuro. The guy who's supposed to be invisible, he's already exposed. Canon Kuro's whole gimmick is speed and subtlety. In this timeline, that gets trivialized. When he vanishes with Shikushi, Luffy doesn't lose track of him for a second. You can imagine Kuro flickering across the battlefield, claws out, convinced no one can follow, and Luffy just turning his head, tracking every step. Armament hardens his fists, and each punch lands exactly where Kuro thinks he's untouchable. No head-smashing cliff gag, no desperate last-second save. It's clinical, efficient, kinda terrifying. From Usopp's point of view, that changes everything. In canon, he sees a rubber idiot who gets stuck, falls, bleeds, and still laughs. That makes bravery feel reachable. Here, he watches a near untouchable fighter dissect the monster that's haunted his village for years, like it's light sparring. Usopp fires a couple of shots, maybe shouts warnings, but nothing he does actually matters. The village is saved before his fear is ever tested. This means that the emotional payoff is inverted. Instead of, I was scared, but I stood my ground, it becomes, I was scared and he didn't even need me. Considering Usopp's whole identity is built on pretending to be a brave warrior, seeing the real thing up close like this would hurt. A lot. So what would happen when Luffy offers him a spot on the crew? We can assume he still does. He likes weirdos, and he'd enjoy having a storyteller on board. But this Usopp might just refuse. Too ashamed, too aware of the gap. In a darker read, I imagine an even worse route. Usopp trying to confront Kuro alone before Luffy arrives, desperate to finally be the hero he lies about, and paying the price off screen. I'm not going to lock that in yet because this is where the timeline starts to fork hard. Just keep in mind, every time Luffy solves a problem too cleanly, he risks erasing the struggle that forged his original bonds. And if Syrup Village is already on that knife's edge, wait until you see what this version of Luffy does to Arlong Park, and what that might cost him with Nami. Anyway, if you think Usopp's fate is shaky, the next island is where things get genuinely dangerous for Luffy's heart, not just his body. So, if Syrup Village already felt like Luffy was speedrunning friendship, did you ever wonder what would happen when that upgraded monster walks into Barady? This is the arc where, in canon, his goofy stubbornness wins Sanji over. But under Rayleigh's shadow, the vibe is very different. For starters, let's anchor the original. Don Krieg staggers in half dead. Mihawk casually slices his entire fleet like it's a warm-up, and Barady turns into a war zone. Luffy smashes through Krieg's armor with raw rubber stubbornness. Sanji refuses to abandon Zeph, and that combination of idiotic bravery and shared respect for Zeph's sacrifice pushes Sanji to finally chase the All Blue. Luffy feels like a peer, not a force of nature. In this timeline, as soon as Krieg shows up with his spiked armor and poison tricks, Luffy doesn't experiment. He's already seen how real monsters fight. Armament coats his fists a dull black, and one punch caves in Krieg's armor instead of 10. The spiked cloak? Crumpled. The MH5 gas launcher? Cracked in half before it even fires. This means that the endurance test part of the fight gets compressed into a brutal, efficient beatdown. And when Krieg's men fire those random barrages into the restaurant, we can assume Luffy's basic observation kicks in. He's calling shots before they land, dragging cooks out of danger, kicking plates into the air to deflect bullets in a way that looks almost choreographed. It's likely Patty and Karn walk away thinking, what kind of kid reads gunfire? Now, Mihawk. In canon, Luffy mostly just sees guy with sword who wrecked Krieg. Here, the second Mihawk's aura rolls over the deck, Luffy feels something Rayleigh-like. Calm, crushing, ancient. I imagine he goes quiet for a second, eyes narrowed, instead of yelling immediately. Pattern interrupt for you. This Luffy doesn't rush Mihawk. He studies him. You could even get a brief observation brush. Mihawk glances at Luffy, senses the oddly composed rookie with haki, and for a heartbeat, they're measuring each other. No duel, but a silent, "Who trained you?" hanging in the air. Considering the world government already hates anything Roger adjacent, that tiny moment would matter later. Sanji's the one really thrown off, though. In canon, Luffy bleeding for Zeph's dream feels human, dumb, reachable. Here, this captain dismantles Krieg like he's doing maintenance. He reads bullets, acknowledges Mihawk with wary respect, and talks about becoming Pirate King, with a calm certainty that sounds a lot like Rayleigh's stories of Roger. Does Sanji join a partner, or board a legend in progress? So Sanji hesitates longer. He still hears Zeph's words, still wants the all blue, but he's asking himself, if I follow this guy, am I just baggage? That insecurity is new tension between them. In the end, he does step onto the Going Merry, but with conditions. He tells Luffy straight, "I'll cook for you, I'll fight for you, but I'm watching. If your strength is used to protect people like Zeph did, I stay. If that old man Rayleigh turned you into some cold king at any cost type, I walk." And Luffy, shaped by Rayleigh but still Luffy, just grins and says, "Watch all you want." The test of what that really means, that's waiting at Arlong Park. So what happens when that test is Arlong Park, one of the ugliest scars in East Blue? Did you ever wonder what would happen if Luffy walked into Nami's nightmare already fighting on Rayleigh's level instead of barely figuring out Gomu Gomu tricks? Canon first, Divergence second. In the original story, Nami plays the traitor, steals the ship, and crawls back to Kokoyasi under Arlong's boot. The village lives in fear, paying tribute while she secretly buys their freedom, and everyone hates her for it. Luffy arrives, gets rejected, watches her stab her own shoulder, and as soon as she finally breaks down and begs for help, he puts the hat on her head and goes to war. That march into Arlong Park, that brutal, messy brawl, is where he proves her pain is his fight. Here, the emotions are the same, but the power gap is insane. For starters, as Luffy walks through Arlong Park's gates, he's already using observation haki like breathing. He feels every spike of killing intent from the fishmen, reads their movements, and it's likely he can tell which ones actually enjoy hurting humans. Arlong's crew lunges with underwater speed kicks and bites, and Luffy just isn't there. He slips past them, head tilting, almost bored, like Rayleigh dodging Kizaru on Sabaody. Then armament comes out. Arlong swings his saw sword, those shark teeth blades that shredded Canon Luffy. And this time, Luffy's fist turns dark and hardens. He punches straight through the weapon, splintering steel and shark teeth together. Every hit caves in scales, breaks jaws, sends fishmen flying into walls they once decorated with humans' fear. This means that Arlong isn't a close fight anymore. He's an example, but the story doesn't lose its heart. Luffy still lets Nami push him away until she can't. She still claws at her tattoo, still screams that she hates Arlong, still collapses in front of him. And he still, very gently, sets the straw hat on her head. Rayleigh might have sharpened his instincts, but he didn't sand down that empathy. When Luffy reaches the map room, I imagine he doesn't just smash it. He coats his fists in armament and erases every chart with the same focused rage Rayleigh used to sink Navy ships. Her stolen years gone in seconds. From Nami's perspective, this is different. In canon, he's reckless and tough, but human. Here, he feels like a walking legend, like the stories of Roger's right hand she overheard from drunk sailors. He saves her with frightening ease, barely bleeding, and considering how terrified she is of powerful pirates. That mix of gratitude and fear hits hard. Who trained this guy? How dangerous is he really? She still joins, of course. Arlong is gone. Belmare's grave is finally at peace. And Luffy's smile is too honest to walk away from. But she's more aware now. Traveling with him isn't just sailing with a goofy captain. It's walking beside someone the world government would absolutely try to erase if they ever connect him to Rayleigh. And that little detail, that's going to matter a lot once they hit the Grand Line, so stick around for that. And now with Nami on board and Arlong behind them, did you ever wonder what would happen the moment this upgraded crew hits Logtown? In canon, It's a fun pit stop before the Grand Line. Here, it quietly becomes the place where the world's spotlight first swings toward a rookie who should have stayed small. For starters, the setup looks familiar. Luffy wants to see the Pirate King's execution platform, Zoro's hunting for swords, Nami's checking charts, and maybe the local tangerine prices. You still get Buggy crashing the party, you still get that iconic scene of Luffy smiling on the scaffold, and you still get lightning splitting the sky. But considering this Luffy trained under Rayleigh since episode 1, the gap shows as soon as Smoker moves. In canon, Smoker just bodies Luffy. Here, as soon as White Chase turns to smoke and lunges, Luffy's observation flares. He sidesteps attacks a half second before they form, like he's reading the future in the way the air shifts. A casual back fist coated in light armament actually makes Smoker's smoke body ripple just for a moment, like it's trying to remember being solid. Smoker still has the upper hand, but he has to work for it, and that's insane for an East Blue rookie. We can assume Smoker is furious and fascinated. This means that his internal monologue flips from another cocky brat to what monster trained this kid. He'd test Luffy more than in canon, forcing exchanges just to confirm what he's seeing, hardened strikes that almost grab Smoke, dodges that feel like precognition, and that overwhelming aura when Luffy gets serious for a heartbeat. When Luffy slips away in the chaos of the storm and Dragon's arrival, Smoker's report to HQ is not standard. He's writing about an unknown rookie using what looks a lot like Haki, plus earlier intel from Shell's Town and Orange Town about weird knockouts and impossible dodges. Add in Arlong Park, where Marines heard rumors of a rubber boy whose glare alone dropped low-level fishmen, and suddenly a dossier starts forming. I imagine some clerk in Marine intelligence underlining phrases like Conqueror-like shockwave and ability set similar to New World veterans. It's likely that one name keeps popping up in whispered side notes too. Silvers Rayleigh, seen years ago in the same sea. Dragon's presence in Logtown also hits different. In canon, he feels Luffy's will and intervenes. Here, during this time, as the wind howls and Luffy laughs on the platform, Dragon doesn't just sense his son's spirit. He recognizes the rhythm of those movements, the timing of those dodges, the way Luffy plants his feet before a clash. It's Rayleigh's style, refined through a rubber body and a reckless grin. Dragon instantly understands the danger. If the world government ever connects Will of D, Rayleigh, and East Blue Rookie, they will panic and move to erase him early. Anyway, back at Marineford and even up in Mary Joie, Smoker's upgraded report lands on desks that usually ignore East Blue noise. A rookie showing Haki, causing Conqueror-like incidents and potentially tied to Roger's right hand? That's not background static anymore. That's a red flag. Luffy, of course, sails away from Logtown laughing about almost dying, more excited about Reverse Mountain than global politics. But as the going merry points toward the Grand Line, unseen eyes start to narrow and one quiet order begins to circulate. Keep watching Monkey D. Luffy, because if this is how strong he is before the Grand Line, what happens when he reaches it? Stick around, because once this Rayleigh-trained Luffy hits Reverse Mountain and Whiskey Peak, that dossier stops being a curiosity and starts looking like a threat assessment. As soon as Luffy's ship rises toward Reverse Mountain, that threat assessment starts writing itself. Did you ever wonder what would happen if a Grand Line rookie hit this entrance already drilled by the Dark King on how the sea likes to kill you for fun? Canon Luffy just laughs and trusts the current. This time, we can assume Rayleigh's voice is in his head the whole climb. Weird currents, sudden squalls, never trust a calm sea. So when the water goes wild, Luffy is excited, but he's also bracing, stretching his senses, using observation to feel the ship's tilt and the crew's fear. He still rides the wave with that stupid grin, but he's the one shouting measured orders, not panicking. This means that the Grand Line starts chaotic, yet controlled. Then Laboon appears, a mountain of whale, a wall of scars. Here's the test. Did early training harden Luffy? I imagine not. For starters, Rayleigh never tried to kill Luffy's heart, only his bad habits. So Luffy still punches Laboon's face to get his attention, still yells about the pain of waiting, still paints the straw hat flag on the whale. The observation is sharper, the stance is cleaner, but the promise is identical. Emotion over efficiency. That's important. Continuing their journey, they hit Whiskey Peak. In canon, Luffy naps through the red flags while Zoro fights alone. Here, as soon as the townsfolk overact their welcome, Luffy's haki quietly pings. Their smiles feel heavy. Their heartbeats spike when they hear the word bounty. He doesn't know every detail, but he knows intent. So instead of sleeping, he plays along, acting drunk, whispering to Zoro and Nami that hunters are coming. When Baroque Works moves in at night, the ambush flips. Zoro doesn't have to slash through the entire town solo. Luffy is already in the dark, casually dodging bullets he feels before they're fired and one-shotting agents with armament-laced blows. It turns into a controlled dismantling instead of a chaotic misunderstanding. No Luffy versus Zoro gag fight, but a showcase of a captain who reads the room like a veteran. Nami notices first. She's watching Luffy call out enemies behind walls he can't see, adjusting to the Grand Line's insane weather with almost bored acceptance. Considering she's the navigator, that freaks her out in a good way. Sanji jokes about combat intuition, but even he starts realizing Luffy moves like someone who's been coached by a monster. Zoro says the least, thinks the most. In canon, his captain is raw talent. Here, it's likely that Zoro looks at Luffy calmly walking through Baroque Works and sees a future Yonko in prototype. The gap between rookie and problem is already shrinking. And during this time, the real butterfly effect is quietly loading. Luffy isn't discovering haki mid-fight anymore. He's refining it. So what happens when this version of Luffy walks into Alabasta against Crocodile, or looks up at Enel on Skypiea, or clashes with CP9? Stick around because the Grand Line just stopped being his classroom and started being his testing ground. So did you ever wonder what would happen if the first real test of that Rayleigh-trained Luffy wasn't some random Grand Line clown, but Crocodile himself in Alabasta? This is where the timeline stops being a cute power-up and starts scaring the people at the top. For starters, let's anchor to canon. In the original story, Alabasta is a nightmare. Civil war, Baroque Works everywhere, Vivi desperate, and Crocodile playing hero while secretly engineering the whole thing. Canon Luffy charges in, gets absolutely bodied twice because he can't touch sand, and only wins after figuring out the water trick and basically bleeding out under the desert. It's iconic, but it's also Luffy winning through stubbornness more than understanding. Now drop in a Luffy who spent his childhood being smacked around by the Dark King. As soon as he sees Crocodile turn to sand, he doesn't go. Huh? My punches don't work. He goes, Logia. Armament. Rayleigh's voice is in his head, reminding him that Logias are only untouchable if you let them be. This means that instead of searching for barrels of water and gimmicks, he's focusing on coating his fists, tightening his will, and treating Crocodile like a training dummy that actually hits back. The first fight still goes bad, but for a different reason. Luffy is cocky. He underestimates the Warlord title, tries to brute force it, and Crocodile punishes him with the desert and that nasty dehydration hook. But the pattern changes as soon as Luffy's armament actually connects. Imagine Crocodile's face when this rookie's punch doesn't pass through him. It sinks in. Blood, not sand, flies. The room goes quiet. From that moment, Crocodile has to take him seriously. No more casual one-handed blocks, no more laughing while Luffy swings. The remixed rematches are faster, tighter, way more brutal. Luffy is still reckless, still yelling attack names, but now every hit can hurt a Logia. He's not relying on the environment. He is the environment. Sandstorms meet haki-coated Gatlings, and the palace shakes. Considering this is all happening in a kingdom already under world government surveillance, the political shockwave is insane. Reports hit Marineford. A young pirate in the first half of the Grand Line defeats Crocodile, a warlord candidate, and eyewitnesses swear his fists were black as iron. We can assume Sengoku doesn't just shrug that off. Garp is pretending not to recognize the style. The Gorosei start asking very specific questions. Who taught this kid haki? And why does it look like Roger's right hand all over again? It's likely that Crocodile, sitting in his cell or licking his wounds in this timeline, is more humiliated than ever, but he's also intrigued. Someone out there is giving Emperor-level techniques to rookies. I imagine that obsession pushes him, and other warlords watching from the shadows, straight onto a collision course with Luffy's future. And if Alabasta was the test, Skypiea and Enies Lobby are about to be the real exam, so stick around. So if Alabasta was the test, did you ever wonder what would happen when our Rayleigh-trained Luffy literally runs into a self-proclaimed god whose whole gimmick is future sight? Skypiea becomes way more than just a rubber versus lightning meme fight. It turns into Luffy's first real hockey chess match in the sky. In canon, Skypiea is Enel's playground. He's sitting on his throne with that smug god complex, using mantra to read every heartbeat, every intention, casually zapping people with lightning before they even move. Luffy only wins because, for starters, rubber is a natural hard counter to electricity, and because his will is too stupidly stubborn to quit. It's iconic, but it's mostly a durability showcase with a funny elemental matchup. Here, we keep the setup the same. Same bell, same golden ball, same crazy survival game. The key difference is that as soon as Enel's mantra starts sweeping the island, Luffy feels it. He doesn't know the name mantra, but he recognizes the sensation. That creeping pressure in the air, the way his skin prickles before an attack. Rayleigh drilled that into him back in Fuchsia. We can assume Rayleigh's early observation training was all about basics, sensing presences through walls, picking out voices in a crowded bar, walking blindfolded through the forest while dodging thrown bottles. Luffy hated it then, but during this time on Skypiea, those memories snap back. When Enel disappears into lightning and reappears behind him, Luffy's observation pings a split-second warning. He still gets hit, but now he's rolling with blows he never would have seen coming in canon. This means that the fight shifts from Enel toys with him until rubber hacks to Enel is shocked that this Blue Sea rookie can partially read him back. Enel's mantra is still stronger and wider. He's tracking the whole island, while Luffy's range is tight and messy. But in close quarters, Luffy starts adapting mid-fight, adjusting his swings when he feels Enel's intent flicker, baiting reactions instead of just charging in. I imagine Rayleigh's invisible hand all over this. Luffy remembers that one lecture. Don't just sense where people are, sense what they're about to do. So he closes his eyes for a moment mid-battle. Yeah, Enel laughs at him, and uses the noise of the arc maxim, the crackle of lightning, even the panicked voices below as anchors to sharpen his focus. It's likely he can't match Enel's calm precision, but he narrows the gap just enough that his rubber immunity becomes the finisher, not the only reason he wins. Symbolically, this is huge. Luffy doesn't just punch out a fake god, he clashes directly with that god's defining power type and survives. Word spreads. A rookie who not only tanked lightning, but outlasted a mantra god in a pure will and sense duel? That sounds like a hockey prodigy the natural elites should be worried about. Considering how fast information travels in the new world, you can bet people are listening. Aokiji hears rumors of a kid who resisted his chill presence and later outread a sky tyrant. Kizaru, who loves testing interesting rookies, starts paying attention to this boy with Rayleigh-like instincts. And somewhere out there, a future monster like Katakuri hears about a rubber upstart who challenged godlike future sight and wonders how long until that kid is knocking on Big Mom's door. Anyway, if Skypiea crowns Luffy as a budding observation freak, Enies Lobby is where the world government finally realizes what kind of weapon Rayleigh accidentally unleashed, and what they're willing to do to erase him. So did you ever wonder what would happen when that budding observation freak crashes into the one arc that already looked like a straight-up declaration of war? In canon, Enies Lobby is Luffy screaming at the world. And this timeline, it's Rayleigh's shadow punching the world government in the face. For starters, let's anchor the canon version. Robin is taken. The Straw Hats invade a government island. Luffy orders Usopp as Sogeking to burn the flag, and CP9 stands in their way with Rokushiki. Soru, Geppo, Tekai, Rankyaku, all of it. Luffy unlocks Gear 2nd to keep up with Blueno's speed, then pushes into gear third for those massive, drawback-heavy blows against Lucci. The Buster Call rains down, they barely escape. Iconic, right? Now imagine that same setup, but with a Luffy who has years of Rayleigh's drills in his muscle memory. As soon as CP9 starts zipping around with Soru, this Luffy doesn't go, "What is that speed?" He goes, "Oh, structured step patterns." We can assume Rayleigh has already broken down movement arts, maybe even name-dropping marine styles, and hinting at Rokushiki as just another way to weaponize fundamentals. This means that when Kaku or Blueno vanish, Luffy's observation is already tracking their intent, not just their bodies. So Soru looks less like magic and more like predictable rhythm. Geppo? Just aerial footing that a rubber body can abuse. I imagine Luffy using tiny gear-second bursts mid-air, hockey-coated soles kicking off invisible footholds, turning CP9's specialty into something he can parody and then surpass. It's likely that the surprise factor that overwhelmed the crew in canon is heavily reduced. They're still dangerous, but they're not unknowable. The real upgrade, though, is the Lucci fight. In canon, Gear Second is raw speed and blood-pumping power, but the hits still clash mostly as brute force versus Tikai and Zoan durability. Here, Luffy is layering armament from the first clash. Every jet pistol is hockey-coated, biting past Tikai like Rayleigh's finger flick on the auction house collar. Lucci's hybrid form still ragdolls him, but each clean hit from Luffy actually tears through that iron body guard instead of bouncing. Observation also changes the tempo. Rokuogen, which almost killed him, becomes a move he can feel coming. He might not dodge every blast, but he anticipates the killing blows, slipping his head just out of line, or using hockey-hardened arms to deflect the worst of the internal shock. The fight stays brutal, but it's far more controlled, like a student executing the Dark King's lessons against the government's ultimate assassin. Here's the pattern interrupt. Picture the Den Mushi feeds. Not just a rubber kid screaming for his friend, but clear hacky usage, gear second steam, armament blackened limbs, and that flag burning above Ini's lobby. Considering the Gorosei already fear anything tied to Roger, a Rayleigh-trained pirate surviving a Buster Call turns from embarrassing incident into systemic threat. This isn't some rookie with lucky punches. This is living proof that Roger's will, techniques, and crew philosophy are back in circulation. And at Marineford headquarters, that changes the conversation. Sengoku can't file Luffy under Garp's idiotic grandson anymore. We can assume internal reports now read like, combat style resembles Silvers Rayleigh. Hockey confirmed, direct ideological defiance. The admirals, especially someone like Kizaru who actually knows Rayleigh, start viewing Luffy as a potential second coming of that crew, not just a noisy supernova. Anyway, that sets up a very different pre-war tension. When the world heads toward Marineford in this timeline, they're not just preparing for Whitebeard, they're bracing for the moment Rayleigh's student walks onto the same battlefield that once crowned the Pirate King's era, and decides whether to shatter it. So, when Luffy finally steps onto Marineford in this timeline, did you ever wonder what the higher-ups are actually seeing? To the crowd, he's just another supernova, but to the people with access to the old Roger-era reports, his movements are basically a living ghost file. For starters, his armament isn't crude. When he blocks a pacifista laser or clashes with a vice admiral, the way the black coating snaps on and off looks way too clean for a kid from East Blue. The timing, the economy of motion, the way he shifts from playful to lethal in a heartbeat, older Marines start whispering that it feels exactly like watching the Dark King warm up back in the day. This means that every observation dodge, every impossible read on Kizaru's light speed kicks, gets cross-checked against those dusty Rayleigh reports. We can assume that Garp notices it first, long before the paperwork does. During this time, every punch Luffy throws is a gut punch to Garp's conscience. He sees the way Luffy's Conqueror's haki bursts out. Not wild and random, but guided. Like someone actually sat this kid down and said, "Here's how you knock out a battlefield without killing anyone." I imagine Garp standing on the execution platform, jaw clenched, thinking, if the world connects Rayleigh to Luffy, they won't see a promising rookie. They'll see Roger 2.0 standing right in front of the gallows. And that's his nightmare, right? He's proud that his grandson can trade blows with admirals, but he also knows what the world government does to symbols. Ace was bad enough, A Rayleigh-trained D who smiles on the scaffold. That's an instant execution order, no hesitation. As soon as the battle data comes in, Sengoku calls a closed-door meeting. Picture Sengoku, Aokiji, Kizaru, Akainu, maybe even a Denden Mushi line patched straight to Mariéjoie. They go through slow-motion recordings of Luffy's clashes. The way he anticipates Kizaru's beams. The familiar footwork when he rushes in. Someone finally says what everyone's thinking. This looks like Rayleigh. From there, the debate gets ugly. Do they put him under constant surveillance? Try to quietly contain him with bounties and controlled skirmishes? Or does Akainu push for total elimination in order to prevent another Pirate King situation? Meanwhile, CP0 starts paying attention. Unlike CP9's loud parkour-obsessed approach, CP0 moves in the background. They track sightings of Rayleigh around Sabaody, cross-reference them with Luffy's growth spurts, and start mapping every ally who might be part of this successor to Roger's Will project. It's likely that even the Straw Hats shipwright and archaeologist get flagged on some secret list. By the end of that review, the decision is chilling but quiet. On paper, Luffy is still a dangerous rookie. Off the record, he's upgraded to potential existential threat. What would happen the next time he walks into a major incident like Marineford? Simple. Any large-scale clash involving Luffy is now greenlit as a situation where his death is an acceptable, even preferable outcome. And that silent label is going to hang over every future showdown in this timeline, especially once Luffy starts pushing into Yonko territory. If you want to see how that pressure warps his next big move, keep watching. So did you ever wonder what would happen if that silent kill switch tag followed Luffy all the way into Impel Down? Because as soon as Ace's execution is announced, this version of Luffy isn't just a reckless little brother charging in. He's a Rayleigh-forged anomaly the world government already flagged as a future catastrophe. Canon first. In the original story, Luffy crashes Impel Down like a disaster in a straw hat. He sneaks in with Hancock, blunders through the levels, gets poisoned by Magellan, and only survives because of Ivankov's crazy hormone treatment. Along the way, he teams up with Buggy, Mr. 2, Crocodile, Jinbe, and a bunch of desperate prisoners, basically brute-forcing his way down the prison tiers while half-dead. Here, the destination is the same, but the route is cleaner and way scarier. For starters, Observation Haki turns Impel. Down into a living map, Luffy can feel patrol routes, killer intent, and hidden traps before they ever touch him. Those random ambushes from Blugori and Demon Guards, he's sidestepping them, dragging Buggy and Bon Clay by the collar like, "Move unless you want to die." It's likely that even Magellan's poison pools are easier to navigate when you can sense danger in the air. Armament is the real game changer. In canon, he struggles just to damage the jailers. Here, a focused, Rayleigh-style gear second punch cracks those Beast Guards' armor in one hit. Minotaurus and the others still hurt, but they're not insurmountable walls anymore, they're benchmarks. This means that Luffy doesn't have to spam every technique on every floor. He can conserve stamina in order to save his full power for Magellan and the escape. And his reputation? That walks into Impel Down before he does. We can assume that stories of a rookie trained by the Dark King, the kid who one-shot Crocodile and humiliated Eni's lobby, have already filtered through the prison. Some jailers are terrified and overcompensate, going straight for lethal force. Some prisoners, especially the smarter ones, see Luffy as their best, and maybe only, ticket out. I imagine Crocodile looks at him very differently this time. Instead of mocking a rubber upstart, he's calculating how to ride this monster's momentum. Jinbe, hearing Rayleigh and Will of D in the same sentence, would most likely decide to back Luffy even earlier, considering what it means for Whitebeard's side in the coming war. During this time, Ace is sitting in his cell hearing rumors drip down from the upper levels. "Your brother's here. He's using Haki like a veteran. They say Rayleigh trained him." Pride hits first, obviously. Ace always knew Luffy would be a problem, but under that, fear. Not fear for himself, but that the world will punish Luffy for daring to grow this fast, this loud, under Roger's shadow. When Luffy finally bursts out toward Marineford, he's not a half-formed fighter stumbling into legend. He's already recognized as a Haki prodigy, a living red flag. Sengoku and the admirals have to adjust the entire battle plan around neutralizing him early. And if you think that doesn't change how the war opens, wait until you see who's ordered to target him first. It's a Kainu. Did you ever wonder who the Marines would throw at a Rayleigh-trained Luffy the moment he steps onto that ice? Sengoku doesn't waste time. Considering the reports from Sabaody and Amazon Lily, he points the rabid dog straight at the rookie with the Dark King's shadow. Cannon first. Whitebeard's ship rises from the depths, the bay freezes, and Ace sits on that execution platform as the world watches. Luffy's desperate charge through the battlefield, the chaos with the Whitebeard commanders, the admirals casually flexing on everyone around them, that all still happens. The key difference here is that Luffy isn't a flailing rubber rookie praying for lucky breaks. He's a half-polished weapon. For starters, as soon as Luffy lands, his observation is already flaring. He's weaving between cannonballs and stray ice shards like it's a training drill with Rayleigh, dragging Ivankov, Jinbei, and even random Whitebeard pirates out of kill zones before they realized they were targeted. Vice admirals, who tried to body him in cannon, now find their blows meeting hardened rubber instead of bare skin. We can assume his armament is rough, but usable. That means that when Kizaru casually rains light down on the battlefield, Luffy actually tags one of those projected bodies with a gear second, hockey-coated punch. It doesn't hurt Kizaru much, but it makes him blink, reform, and actually look annoyed. That tiny moment of surprise? It saves a squad of New World pirates that would have been erased. His famous Conqueror's burst on the platform walkway also plays out very differently. In canon, it's wild and accidental. Here, I imagine Rayleigh's voice in his head telling him to direct it. Luffy still panics, but the wave is tighter, heavier, and it sweeps through a much larger chunk of fodder Marines and weak officers, clearing a more stable path for the allies behind him. You get this visual of a corridor of collapsed bodies leading straight toward Ace. And yes, Garp feels that. Luffy's clashes go up a tier. Smoker and a couple of Logia users find out his punches suddenly bite. He doesn't dominate them, but he forces them to respect his swings, using observation to pre-read their patterns and armament to make every hit count. When an admiral-level strike from a Kainu or Aokiji is about to erase Jinbei or Ivankov, Luffy dives in, blocks with hardened arms, and gets blown back bleeding, but alive. This means that a few key support pieces actually survive longer. So what would happen with Ace's rescue window? With better control and instincts, Luffy most likely reaches the platform faster, coordinating unconsciously with Whitebeard's pushes. Maybe he helps Marco and Vista disrupt Kizaru more effectively, or buys an extra second when Sengoku transforms. That extra second is everything in Marineford. When Akainu goes for the killing blow, this Luffy is closer, sharper, and less blind with panic. He might intercept more cleanly, or drag Ace just out of the worst of it, changing who takes the brunt. But Marineford is still a war of monsters. Even with Rayleigh's training, Luffy's only shifting probabilities, not rewriting reality. And if that sounds frustrating, good, because the fallout of those tiny shifts might be even bigger than a straightforward rescue. So did you ever wonder what would happen if that same 2-year Rayleigh training still happened? But with a Luffy who already spent years under the Dark King's wing, Marineford doesn't get undone, but the time skip becomes something way scarier for the rest of the world. In canon, after the war, Luffy shows up on Rusakaina, basically hockey illiterate. For starters, Rayleigh has to teach him what hockey even is, how to feel the presence of animals, how to code his fists, how to stop wasting energy. It's boot camp from zero. Here, as soon as Luffy steps onto that island, he's already dodging giant beasts with instinctive observation, throwing armament-boosted punches, and leaking raw conquerors in grief. We can assume Rayleigh takes one look at him and instantly realizes two things. 1, the kid survived Marineford but didn't escape it. The trauma is written in his posture, in the way he flinches when someone says, Ace. 2, the foundation they built back in East Blue and early Grand Line is still there, just buried under shock. This means that instead of repeating the basics, Rayleigh can skip straight to high-level applications. So the training shifts. Rayleigh blindfolds Luffy and forces him to read not just intent, but the future, those brief half-second flashes we see in canon Whole Cake Island. Considering they have 2 full years, It's likely that Future Sight becomes something Luffy can toggle under pressure, not a desperate accident. Imagine him on Rusakaina, casually weaving through a rain of boulders because he's already seen every impact point. Armament goes the same way. In canon, Rayleigh only teases the idea of internal destruction. Here, he drills it. Luffy learns to push Haki inside targets, cracking trees from the core, stunning giant beasts without even visibly touching them. By year 2, his Gear 2 and Gear 3 strikes aren't just stronger. They're precise tools designed to dismantle tough opponents from the inside out. And then there's Conquerors. Luffy already had it as a kid, and Rayleigh in this timeline has been nudging him toward control for years. After Marineford, he finally talks about coding. Not full Wano-level mastery, but early concepts, clashing with elites without contact, reinforcing blows with willpower alone. It's rough, it's inconsistent, but when it lands, even top New World captains would feel it. Emotionally, this reunion might be the harshest part. Rayleigh sees the bandages, the scar on Luffy's chest, the empty look when Ace's name comes up. He doesn't go soft, he goes sharper. Every time Luffy collapses, Rayleigh asks, "Why do you want this strength?" Over and over until Luffy's answer isn't to save Ace, but so no one gets taken from me like that again. By the end of the 2 years, this Luffy is not just post-time skip strong. He's edging into early Yonko Commander territory. More consistent Haki, early Future Sight, semi-reliable internal destruction, and the beginnings of Conqueror's coding mean he can actually plan how to break admirals and emperors down instead of just throwing himself at them. He's still not beating Kaido solo at this point, but vice admirals and most warlords, they're in real danger, and the world feels it. During this time, rumors spread that the Dark King vanished with the Will of D-Boy again. Cypher Pole reports disappear, Marine scouts never return from certain seas, and someone in Mariégeois quietly asks if they're watching the birth of the next Roger, or something worse. If you're enjoying this spiral, by the way, don't forget to stick around, because the post-time skip world with a near admiral level Luffy moves very differently. As the 2 years end, one question hangs over every faction. When Luffy steps back onto the stage, whose plans does he shatter first? As that question hangs over the world, we're going to do something that the Marines, the Yonko, and probably Rayleigh himself would hate. We're going to hit pause. Did you ever wonder what would happen if you were the one steering this crazy timeline from here? We've just set up a post-time skip Luffy, who's walking back into the new world with Haki control that most captains would kill for, a reputation tied to the Dark King, and a target on his back the size of Mariégeois. This is the perfect breather before the next wave of chaos hits. So, your version. What happens as soon as Luffy steps off that boat? Does he beeline straight for a Yonko, just to make a point? I imagine some of you are already picturing him marching into Big Mom's territory and coating his fists in advanced armament like it's warm-up practice. Or maybe, considering his history, he goes right after Kaido to test Conqueror's coding years earlier than canon. Or do you rewrite the tragedy counter? In your timeline, does Ace actually live? We can assume that Rayleigh's training gave Luffy enough awareness and raw power to change Marineford completely. So do you have him intercept Akainu? Or does he drag Ace out before the fists of magma ever land? This means that your comment can literally decide if this AU becomes the Ace Lives universe or the Akainu gets folded universe. And then there's the personal stuff. For starters, who does Luffy confront first? Shanks or Blackbeard? Does he roll up on Shanks just to measure how far he's come compared to the man who inspired him? Or does he hunt Blackbeard early, cutting off the entire Yonko Ascension before it even starts? It's likely that the order you choose here completely rewires the balance of the new world, and I'm genuinely curious which domino you knock over first. Quick pattern interrupt while the war is on pause. We can't rewrite Oda's canon, but you can absolutely rewrite this channel's future. If you're deep in this Rayleigh-trained madness, hit subscribe, tap like so the algorithm knows this timeline is worth protecting, and drop your wildest Luffy plus Dark King scenario in the comments. Who does he one-shot? Who does he spare? Who does he terrify just by walking onto the island? Anyway, yes, I know this is a weird moment to break immersion when the world is basically on fire and the new world is about to get cracked open. But think of this as your strategy meeting during this time skip. You're setting the course. We're charting it. Because when we dive back in, the new world does not look the same. Yonko territories shift, marine priorities change, and the entire race for the One Piece warps around a Luffy who's years ahead of schedule in hockey, experience, and legend. And next, we'll see exactly whose empire he shakes first. So, when this overtrained Luffy finally sails into the new world, did you ever wonder what would happen to that so-called delicate balance between the Yonko? Because with Rayleigh from episode 1 and a full-time skip on top, he's basically walking into a chessboard where all the kings suddenly realize a new piece just appeared. For starters, the new world is still carved up the way you remember. Big Mom running a candy-coated surveillance empire, Kaido turning Wano and his other territories into war factories, Shanks holding a relatively stable zone, and Blackbeard expanding like a parasite into every gap he can find. The Marines and world government are stretched thin, barely keeping up with Yonko skirmishes, revolutionary movements, and post-Marineford politics. This means that any new name strong enough to shake that balance gets flagged instantly. In canon, Luffy shows up and people laugh him off as another rookie with a big mouth until he starts breaking things. Here, as soon as he steps onto a New World island, word travels differently. We can assume the reports say things like, hockey on Rayleigh Iderbe's level, lineage connected to Garp and Dragon, behavior eerily similar to Roger. He's not just a supernova, he's treated as a serious emerging power whose presence feels like a callback to the Pirate King era. Considering how paranoid the Gorosei are about the will of D, that's a nightmare. Now imagine the Shanks reunion in this context. In canon, it's this long-awaited emotional payoff. Here, Shanks sees a kid who already wields advanced observation and armament, with conquerors crackling in the air the same way Rayleigh's did on Sabaody. The hat isn't just a promise anymore, it's a countdown. Shanks has to talk to him like an equal contender, not a future one. He'd warn him that rushing to Laugh Tale too fast could trigger a war the world isn't ready for, and I imagine he'd press harder on responsibility. Who gets dragged into the crossfire if Luffy sprints for the endgame now? Meanwhile, the other Yonko react in very different ways. Kaido most likely hears about a rubber brat trained by the Dark King and just laughs, labeling Luffy as a future Joy Boy candidate worth testing. He wants that fight, but he wants it at its peak. Big Mom sees a wild card who doesn't fit into her marriage and soul trade strategies, so she'd either try to absorb him into the Charlotte Web or eliminate him before he disrupts Tadoland's security. Blackbeard is the scariest reaction. He knows Rayleigh's history. A Luffy molded by the Dark King screams, "Future obstacle to my darkness." It's likely that Teach either tries to engineer an early clash to steal whatever advantages he can, or quietly manipulates events so Luffy bleeds against other Yonko first. Anyway, all of this stacks into one massive shift. With Rayleigh's early training and the time skip boost combined, Luffy isn't just entering the race for the One Piece. He's accelerating the final lap. The Indictum. Ancient secrets, void century truths, Emu's plans. Everything gets dragged forward on his schedule, not the world government's. But whose territory does he actually crack first, and which domino sends the whole era crashing down? That's where things get really dangerous. And that's really the core of this timeline, right? Did you ever wonder what would happen if Luffy stopped being the idiot who wings it and became the idiot who wings it with Rayleigh-level fundamentals from day one? For starters, his whole childhood is different. Instead of just punching bandits and screaming about becoming Pirate King, he's learning to feel killing intent in the forest, coating his fists in clumsy armament, and getting smacked on the head every time his observation slips. East Blue stops being the weakest sea and turns into his personal training ground. Buggy, Kuro, Don Krieg, Arlong. Most likely, they don't feel like real bosses. They feel like sparring dummies. This means that Zoro gets recruited by someone who can already block bullets with haki, Nami's village is freed faster, and Usopp either levels up way earlier or gets left behind by a captain who's moving too fast. By the time he hits the Grand Line, we can assume Crocodile doesn't get 3 rounds. A Rayleigh-trained Luffy walks into Alabasta with solid armament, budding conquerors, and enough observation to read that Sand Logia like a book. Enel? As soon as Luffy realizes he can actually feel those lightning strikes coming, Scipio turns into a one-sided beatdown. CP9 during this time would be facing a kid who accidentally mixes Gear Second with Haki and breaks Takai like it's glass. The big fights end quicker, the collateral damage is lower, and a lot of innocent people are saved. But the trade-off is ugly. That same competence means the Straw Hats don't form the same way. Maybe Usopp never gets that chance to be the brave warrior of the sea by Luffy's side. Maybe Chopper looks at this terrifyingly focused captain and hesitates. It's likely that Robin sees Rayleigh's fingerprints on Luffy and realizes the world government will erase anyone near him. Every victory also broadcasts one message to the Marines and the Garossi. Roger's will is back and it's being coached. I imagine Sengoku, Akainu, even the Cypher Pole chiefs treating him less like a rookie pirate and more like a walking catastrophe flag. Buster calls get authorized faster. Assassination orders go out earlier. Shichibukai are pushed to intercept him long before Sabayuri. Rayleigh's training gives Luffy the tools to survive, sure, but it also paints a giant target on his back as Roger's spiritual successor, which terrifies not just the world government, but rival pirates who don't want a second Pirate King candidate rising before they're ready. So here's the real question. Does this Luffy actually save more people? Or does he break faster? Does a sharper, hacky-polished captain reach Marineford in time to pull Ace off the platform, keep more allies alive, and maybe even sprint toward Laugh-Tale years early? Or does the pressure of being Rayleigh's student crush him under expectations, betrayal, and non-stop war before he ever gets close to One Piece? Anyway, I want to hear your version. Which saga should we remix next with Rayleigh-trained Luffy? Dressrosa, Whole Cake, or Wano? Drop your pick and your wildest theory in the comments, and if you want to see how this alternate Luffy clashes with Doflamingo, Big Mom, and Kaido, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of this timeline.